Stephen, when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh my God! When I was very little, I wanted to be a garbage man because I wanted to drive one of those big trucks. That was my great desire. I think probably when I got a little older, I I toyed with the idea of going into the diplomatic service, and I used to read all of those Prager books about foreign affairs. But unfortunately, just about the time that I was going off to university, the Vietnam War broke out, and I got involved in the anti-war movement, and so working in the diplomatic service was no longer an option.
What's been your relationship to Judaism? What level of observance were you raised with, if any?
Oh, lots. First of all, I grew up in a Zionist Hebrew-speaking home. I have my family was long involved in the Zionist movement. I have two of my great uncles fought in the British Legion for Palestine. My mom and her brothers and her mother and her grandmother went to Palestine in the 1920s and helped lay the stones for Tel Aviv, and they lived there for a number of years. I was raised in an observant, kosher, conservative Jewish home, and I went to Camp Ramah for 10 summers. And, people think that Osama bin Laden's training camps make devotees. I can tell you Camp Ramah really does it. I absolutely loved it. And I started out in bunk number 1. I ended up being a director on the waterfront, taking people out on canoe trips in Camp Ramah in Canada. And I speak Hebrew almost fluently. I spent 2 summers working on a kibbutz in Israel, so that my Judaism is very firmly rooted. One of my brother-in-laws is a Reform rabbi. I was very much immersed in Jewish culture, in a general sense of Yiddishkeit. We were, I think it's fair to say, on the secular side compared to some people, but very, very deeply imbued in Jewish values, and certainly observing all of the holidays, and again, Hebrew is very, very important, and I think a sense of Jewish peoplehood was, really a great foundation of my upbringing.
What are Jewish values as opposed to, say, the same middle-class, educated American values? What are Jewish values?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a very good question. I think, some of it sounds, I'm sure, terribly prosaic, but I think a sense that the purpose of life is service. I was never taught that what mattered was to make money. My mother was a teacher. My father was a civil servant. The notion that I had a responsibility to the community, the notion that the pursuit of justice was what defined a life that was worth leading, the notion of loyalty to my peoplehood and also loyalty to my country as an American, those were very important. I mean, my dad was an immigrant, so I'm a first-generation American, and I think that was a very important piece of the puzzle as well. I think that I grew up in a town in New Jersey, which is now has tons and tons of Jews. But when I lived there, we were among the only Jews in town, and I think that everyone else was quote unquote normal, and we were seen, I think, somehow as different and strange and ethnic, and so there was a separation which was to some sense enforced, but also, I felt a deep sense of allegiance to things that went beyond, the everyday, and that was a sense of allegiance again to peoplehood. I became aware at an early age of the Holocaust through watching the Eichmann trial on television, going off to Israel on my own as a teenager. I think those things really made a difference. So that I shared allegiances with my classmates. We were all Americans. But for example, I was certainly the strongest one in support of civil rights in my community, and I know that came very, very much out of being Jewish. In some ways, I think that Jews of my generation, I'm 61, were Americanized actually through the civil rights movement, through their involvement or their cheering on, as it were, of the civil rights movement. Anyway,
okay, that's fascinating. I just want to challenge you on one thing, simply as an invitation to get you to elucidate more. You mentioned that your involvement in civil rights grew out of your Jewish values. It's curious that the most Jewish of Jews, which I will say are the Orthodox, have been and are the least involved in civil rights, while those Jews who have been the most involved in pushing for civil rights have been the least involved Jewishly. How do you understand that?
Well, I would challenge your definition of Jewish, first of all. You are defining Jewish in terms of religious observancy. I don't believe that Judaism can be defined in one way or another to the exclusion of other forms. I go with Mordechai Kaplan's notion that Judaism is a civilization. The civilization is composed of many parts. It's composed of peoplehood, it's composed of ethics, it's composed of religious observance, it's composed of many, many things. In fact, the American Jewish Committee does an annual survey of how it is that Jews define themselves as Jewish, and they ask them, among the choices that are given are peoplehood, the pursuit of justice, Israel, and religion. Religion comes in last every time. And what comes in first is peoplehood, and what comes in second is a sense of justice. And I really do challenge you. I do not accept the notion that Orthodox Jews are more Jewish than I am, or that any Orthodox rabbi is more Jewish than my Reformed Jewish brother-in-law, who is a rabbi, or more knowledgeable for that matter. I reject that claim completely. In fact, in many ways, I find it the most intellectually confined form of Judaism, and the one that has produced, in some respects, the least interesting thought.
I'm just going to think about what you said before I ask you a question.
I mean, I'm not, it strikes me as extremely presumptuous on the part of Orthodox Jews to say to other Jews, we are less Jewish than you. By what standard? By what standard? I mean, again, if you want to make religious observancy the be-all and end-all, yes, that's true. But again, I think to be a Jew is to be part of the civilization, which contains many, many elements, of which I would have thought the pursuit of justice, following the prophetic tradition, is equally as important as keeping kosher, for example, or shaking a lulav, or sniffing an etrog, which strike me for the most part as, in the end, really rather quaint and not in the great scheme of things, terribly unimportant.
Do you ever question what you just said, or is that like set in stone at Sinai for you in its definitiveness?
No, it's not set in stone, Luke. I think like many Jews who, I mean, I grew up in Camp Mike and Dav and everything by heart. There is part of me, there's part of me that always remains a seeker. And there's part of me that responds very powerfully to prayer, and I would define myself certainly not as an atheist. I think I guess I'm an agnostic, looking for the Jewish God. So that if I sounded glib, please forgive me. I didn't mean to be. I only felt a little offended by what struck me as a tone of superiority, and it's a tone that I frequently encounter from Orthodox Jews. It bothers me especially, I think, when those when jokes like that are made about Reform rabbis, I mean, my brother-in-law